The Vela Incident, the nuclear flash that didn't exist. An operator says, Sierra Station to Vela Hotel 59er. Signal check. Over. Copy, 59er. All pang meters nominal. Orbit stable. Continue watch. Stand by. Sierra Station, we have an event. I have a Category 1 event on Vela 59er. Voice from control says, confirm category. Operator, confirming. Double flash signature. Reading the profile now. Intensity spike in the visible spectrum. Rapid decay. Second larger thermal pulse. This is the pattern. Repeat. This is the double flash pattern. Control. Grid location. Operator. Calculating Zashuntitimoan, South Atlantic, Indian Ocean sector. Coordinates 47 degrees south, 40 degrees east. Timestamp 0053 Zulu. That sound you just felt was impossible. According to the treaties signed, the satellites watching, and the promises made by every major power on Earth, that sound should not have existed in the early hours of September 22nd, 1979. But a machine saw it. An American Vela hotel satellite, designated 6911, drifting in the silent black, detected the unmistakable fingerprint of a nuclear explosion in the atmosphere. The double flash. A fleeting intense burst of light, followed milliseconds later by a larger, hotter fireball of radiation. It is the unique signature of an atomic bomb. There is no natural phenomenon that replicates it. And so, in an underground facility in the United States, a protocol that had never been used in earnest was activated. The call went out, climbing the chain of command, waking men in dark rooms. It carried a simple, world-altering message. Someone has just tested a nuclear weapon, and no one is claiming responsibility. This left the President of the United States with two catastrophic options. One, a third, unknown power had secretly joined the most exclusive and dangerous club on the planet. Or two, America's billion-dollar early warning system, the very foundation of its nuclear deterrence, was broken. What unfolded was not an investigation. It was an autopsy on a ghost, a secret war between scientists, a geopolitical hall of mirrors where allies became suspects and enemies became alibis. This is the full story of the Vela Incident, the bomb that, according to the official record, never was. Act 1, the Sentinel, a machine built to watch the dark. To comprehend the gravity of that signal, you must first understand the machine that sent it. Its name was Vela Hotel. Not a hotel for guests, but a Sentinel. A constellation of 12 top-secret satellites launched in the 1960s under a joint program by the US Atomic Energy Commission and the Department of Defense. Their mission was singular, born from paranoia and necessity, to be the unwavering eyes of the 1963 Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Dr. Dr. Alan F. said, "The bang meter was really quite elegant. It was a set of photodiodes, sensors designed not to see an image, but to measure pure light intensity. The key was the temporal signature. A lightning bolt gives a single sharp spike, a meteor, a longer burn. But a nuclear fireball, it has a very specific two-stage profile. The physics are brutal and beautiful. When a fission bomb detonates, the initial chain reaction releases an immense burst of X-rays. These heat the surrounding air into a plasma, creating the first intensely bright flash. This fireball is so hot it momentarily becomes opaque, shielding the inside. As it expands and cools, it becomes transparent again, allowing the even hotter interior radiation to shine out. That's the second, longer flash. 2 pulses, a few milliseconds apart, a signature written in the raw language of physics. For over a decade, the Vela satellites had watched. They had successfully detected 41 atmospheric tests, French tests in the Pacific, Chinese tests at Lop Nue. They were the silent witnesses to the Cold War, their data flowing into the secret heart of the US government. They had never cried wolf. Until the early morning of September 22nd, 1979. Vela 6911, the oldest of the still-functioning satellites, 10 years into a 7-year mission, turned its aging eyes towards a patch of the Earth that was supposed to be empty. The coordinates placed the event in one of the most remote places on the planet, the South Atlantic, midway between the tip of South Africa and the frozen coast of Antarctica. The closest land was the Prince Edward Islands, tiny volcanic specks inhabited only by penguins and seals. The water here was miles deep, perpetually storm-racked, and far from commercial shipping lanes. If you wanted to hide a secret from the world, this was the place to do it. In Washington, D.C., it was still evening on the 21st. The signal triggered a cascade of alerts through the Pentagon, the CIA, the Situation Room. President Jimmy Carter was notified. His administration, already grappling with an energy crisis, hostage tensions in Iran, and a sinking sense of American power, now faced a potential paradigm shift. A new, rogue nuclear state. They waited. For a press release from Moscow, from Paris, from Beijing. For a signal, a boast, a claim. The silence that followed was, in its own way, louder than the blast. Act 2. The Schism. Science at war with itself. With no claimant, the Carter administration did the only thing it could. It appointed a committee, not a public inquest, but a secret, ad hoc panel of America's top scientists led by Dr. Jack Ruina of MIT. The Ruina Panel. Their mandate was to review every scrap of data and answer the question, was this beyond any reasonable doubt a nuclear explosion? The panel's work began in a climate of extreme tension. They were not just evaluating sensors, they were evaluating the credibility of America's entire nuclear detection apparatus. The evidence they gathered fell into 2 columns. Column A, the case for a bomb. First, the double flash itself. Vela 6911's sensors recorded a near textbook profile. Dr. Joseph said, "We modelled everything, superbolts of lightning, meteoroids impacting the satellite itself, glints from ice clouds. The signal-to-noise ratio, the pulse shape. It matched a low-yield nuclear event, probably in the 2 to 3 kiloton range, almost perfectly. It was not a maybe. To the satellite, it was a yes." Second, hydroacoustic data. The world's oceans are wired with sound. The US Navy's SOSUS network, a secret array of underwater microphones designed to hunt Soviet submarines, listens constantly. In the days following the event, analysts poring over SOSUS tapes found an anomaly. A T wave, a tertiary acoustic wave, had been detected at a hydrophone station near Ascension Island in the Atlantic. Its timing and trajectory pointed back to the Vela coordinates. It was the sound of a large, submerged explosion. Third, the ionospheric disturbance. At the University of Tasmania's research station, an instrument monitoring the charged layer of the upper atmosphere recorded a strange, sudden ripple at the precise time of the event. A large energy release in the lower atmosphere can punch upwards, disturbing the ionosphere like a stone thrown into a pond. Fourth, and most damning, the radioactive cloud. This is where the story moves from signals to substance. Within days, a US Air Force WC-135B Constant Phoenix aircraft, a so-called sniffer plane, specifically designed to sample the air for the particulate ghosts of nuclear tests, was dispatched. Flying a pattern between Australia and South Africa, its high-volume air filters collected dust from the upper atmosphere. Back at the lab, analysis revealed elevated levels of certain short-lived radioactive isotopes, notably iodine-131, strontium-92, and certain forms of xenon. These are not naturally occurring in such combinations. They are the unique fission-born ashes of an atomic bomb. The case seemed overwhelming, but the Ruina panel had a second column. Column B, the problems, the absences. The first and most glaring absence was seismic. A low-yield explosion, even in the air or shallow water, transfers energy into the ground. The global network of seismometers, designed to feel the footsteps of underground tests, felt nothing. No tremor. It was as if the Earth itself denied the event. Second, the lack of eyewitnesses. The double flash from a 2-kiloton bomb would have been visible for hundreds of miles on a clear night. The Cape of Good Hope shipping lanes were busy. Commercial airliners crossed the southern oceans. Not a single captain, pilot, or sailor reported seeing a sudden, sun-bright flash on the horizon. The only witness was a machine alone in the dark. Third, the health of the witness. Vela 6911 was ancient by aerospace standards. It had suffered previous minor malfunctions. Could a random event, the impact of a micrometeoroid on its sun shield, a sudden discharge from its aging solar panels, have mimicked the double flash signal? The panel consulted engineers from the Aerospace Corporation, which built the satellites. An aerospace engineer said, "We could not rule it out entirely. The satellite was operating beyond its design life." We presented the probabilities. A random, simultaneous failure in 2 independent sensor channels that perfectly mimicked a nuclear signature. The odds were astronomically low, but not zero. The scientific community fractured. It was a civil war conducted in secure conference rooms and through classified memos. Experts with the highest clearances accused each other of professional blindness, of being in the tank for the Air Force, or of being naive to the realities of intelligence. The Ruina panel was under immense pressure. A finding of nuclear test would force a geopolitical confrontation the White House dreaded. A finding of no test would expose potentially fatal flaws in the nation's early warning system. In the end, they chose a third path: ambiguity. Their report, issued in the summer of 1980, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic hedging. It acknowledged the data. It listed the anomalies. Its ultimate conclusion was, while the signal had many characteristics of a nuclear explosion, the available data are also consistent with other non-nuclear phenomena. The panel believes that the signal was probably not from a nuclear explosion. The key physical evidence, the hydroacoustic data, the radioactive isotopes, was dismissed. The T wave was attributed to a possible small earthquake. The radioactive sniff was blamed on residual contamination from earlier Chinese tests, an explanation many nuclear chemists found laughable. The case was officially closed. A zoo event, they called it. A strange animal in the Delta Zoo. But in the shadows, the hunt for the culprit was just beginning. Act 3. The suspects. A game of shadows. If it was a bomb, the list of suspects was short, terrifying, and politically radioactive. 3 primary candidates emerged, each a geopolitical bombshell in its own right. Suspect 1. The apartheid regime. South Africa's white minority government was a pariah, under crushing international sanctions and facing rising internal black resistance. It had a secret, urgent nuclear program called Project Circle. Their motivation was the doomsday device scenario, a final terrible weapon to deter what they saw as a communist-backed onslaught. Declassified documents would later confirm they had built 6 crude gun-type atomic bombs. They had the means. They had the territory. The Prince Edward Islands were South African possessions. But did they have the will to test alone, risking the final rupture with the West? Suspect 2. Israel. Israel's nuclear policy was ambiguity. They neither confirmed nor denied possessing the bomb, but by 1979, the world knew. They had the Dimona reactor, the expertise. Their motivation was perpetual existential threat. They were also developing the Jericho-2 missile, which required a compact, proven warhead. A full-yield test was the final step. But Israel had no remote territory. Unless the theory, a joint test, this became the most persistent and logical theory. Israel and South Africa had a deep clandestine alliance. They shared military technology, from missiles to radar. Israeli advisors were on the ground in South Africa's nuclear program. It was a marriage of convenience. Israel needed a test site. South Africa needed technical expertise and perhaps a more sophisticated bomb design. A joint test in the remote South Atlantic served both their needs perfectly. This theory had a name among intelligence analysts: the South Atlantic Event. Diplomat quoted, "The chatter in the intelligence community was overwhelming. It wasn't a question of if it was them, but why they did it then." The timing, right before a US election, suggested a calculated risk that a distracted Carter administration would choose to look the other way. End quote. Suspect 3. The unthinkable pact. The wildest theory, whispered only in the most secure compartments. What if it was a test by the United States and the Soviet Union together? Both superpowers were researching third-generation nuclear weapons. The neutron bomb, an enhanced radiation weapon designed to kill people while leaving buildings intact. Testing it openly would violate the Test Ban Treaty and cause a public outcry, but a secret, joint test in the middle of nowhere. It would allow both sides to validate their designs while maintaining the public fiction of compliance. It would explain the immediate, coordinated effort to bury the story from both sides. It would mean the Cold War enemies were, in at least one dark corner, collaborators. The Carter administration's response pointed fingers, but quietly. Satellite imagery was scrutinised. Any unusual naval movement near the Prince Edward Islands in late September 1979. A previously overlooked CIA memo, declassified decades later, noted a flare of activity at South Africa's Simonstown naval base and the unexpected presence of an Israeli naval vessel in the region for unscheduled exercises. But without a smoking gun, public accusation was impossible. To accuse South Africa risked pushing them into a defiant, public nuclear stance. To accuse Israel was politically unthinkable for any US administration. So the official story remained a mystery, a glitch, a zoo event. The truth was not buried in the ocean. It was buried in the too hard box of international relations. Act 4. The aftermath. Ghosts in the machine. The Vela Incident didn't end with the Ruina report. It became a ghost, haunting the halls of science and intelligence for decades. In the 1990s, with the fall of apartheid, the new South African government under Nelson Mandela confessed. They admitted to having built 6 atomic bombs. They claimed they had dismantled them without ever testing. But the story had cracks. A senior South African naval officer, Dieter Gerhardt, who was later convicted as a Soviet spy, claimed from prison that a test had occurred. He alleged it was an Israeli-South African joint venture and that the flash was successfully disguised from prying eyes. Then in 2016, the CII declassified a gem, a memo from the agency's Deputy Director for Science and Technology, written in March 1980. Its conclusion was stark. The best technical interpretation of the data is that the September 22nd signal was a nuclear weapons test. The preponderance of the evidence points to South Africa as the most likely responsible party, possibly in cooperation with Israel. But the most damning evidence came not from spies but from sheep. In 2018, a team of researchers from the universities of Canterbury and Arizona published a groundbreaking study. They didn't look at satellites or memos. They looked at old, archived samples of sheep thyroids from Tasmania and southern New Zealand, collected in the months after September 1979. These glands concentrate iodine. The researchers tested them for iodine-131, a radioactive isotope with a half-life of only 8 days. The results were unambiguous. The sheep from late 1979 showed a significant sharp spike in iodine-131 levels, a spike that did not match the known fallout patterns from earlier French or Chinese tests. The only plausible source was a recent fission event in the southern hemisphere. The radioactive cloud the WC-135 sniffed was real. It had left its mark on the other side of the world in the bodies of grazing animals. Science 40 years later had delivered its verdict. The satellite was right. Act 5. The echo, what remains. So what are we left with? The Vela incident is not a mystery of physics. The physics are clear. It is a mystery of politics, of perception, of the human capacity for willful blindness in the face of inconvenient truth. It stands as a monument to a terrifying idea that our systems for knowing the world, our brilliant machines, our networks of sensors, our scientific method, are only as strong as our collective courage to accept what they tell us. We can build a Sentinel to watch the dark, but we cannot force ourselves to believe its report if that report is too devastating to comprehend. The Vela satellites are all dead now, their orbits decaying, their watch long over. But the ghost of that double flash remains. It is a permanent scar on the historical record, a question that was never answered, only managed, a silent testament to the fact that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is not a secret weapon, but a shared secret. An agreement, spoken or unspoken, to pretend that a flash of light in the distant darkness was just a trick of the eye, a glitch in the machine, a phantom. Because the alternative, admitting that the rules had been broken, that the club had a new reckless member, that our vigilance had failed, was at that moment in history simply too bright to look at directly. That was the Vela Incident. If you want to hear the full story on our next case, subscribe to our channel. 404 Mystery Found. Thank you for listening.